2 years, 100 episodes, and I have just one word: grateful. Because all of this would not be possible without you. So before I can even start this conversation, I just have to say thank you so much. Episode 100 of HIListically Speaking, a podcast that I started back in June of 2020 when we dropped the first episode. And it wasn't because of the pandemic, like so many podcasts started back then. So many amazing podcasts, by the way. Oh no, this is an idea that I've had for a long time. And I still remember the day back in April of 2019 when I met my dear friend Alan Seals at Google headquarters to tell him about my idea. And he was, working on his own podcast, putting stuff together himself, so he got it. And I basically said, I want to amplify voices. I want to tell stories. And I remember saying, and it came out of my mouth and it's become the thing for this podcast, I want to tell empowering stories with guests of varied expertise, sharing their traumas to triumphs through health, healing, and humor. Basically, I want to talk about what it takes to be a happy and healthy grown-up. Simple. There's my elevator pitch. I had it down. And you know what? Without even blinking an eye, Alan was all in. All in to help me create this passion project that meant so much to me. And he guided me throughout that first year. And I have to say, there were a lot of ups and downs. I think I talked to him more than I talked to my mom. But with that being said, for good reason, he was a good friend. And it paved the way for what this podcast has become. So thank you, Alan. And with that, I then reached out to my friend Lipbone Redding, amazing, talented musician. And before I knew it, I was just telling him that I would love to use his music. Had no idea what song. I had a song in mind. And the interesting thing is, he came back to me without a hitch. And he's like, of course, I have the perfect song for you. And it was the song I was thinking of, which is what you hear every episode since day one, Chandra. That's the music of HIListically Speaking, and the song really resonates with me. It means a lot to me, and it's the perfect song. So thank you, Lipbone, for sharing your voice and your talents. And by the way, both of these guys have their own episodes on HIListically Speaking. Alan is episode 10, talking about Broadway and beyond and mental health, and then Lipbone talking about his own story on episode 9. So if you have not heard either of these episodes, I highly recommend it because everyone has a story, and these two have amazing stories. I had no idea where I was going with this. I really didn't, but I knew I had good people behind me, good friends, and they were in my corner. Friends, family, guests, listeners, my Thrive Hive, as I love to call it, right? And here we are, 2 years later, 100 episodes, so many amazing guests, people I never imagined would say yes. But that in itself taught me something. You won't hear a yes or a no if you don't ask, And you know what? Since I launched this podcast, I've only had 2 people say no, and one of them actually came back. So how do you like them apples? It just goes to show you, you won't hear either answer if you don't ask. So ask. And speaking of asking, let's get to those questions. You have so many great things that you've been asking me, and I have been having so much fun reading all of these questions that you've been submitting. They've been coming into my inbox, my DMs, my PMs on social media, because as I promised in this episode, it would be yours. You would be the producer, right? How this goes is because I decided that in celebration of this milestone, the title of Chief Question Asker, which is normally me, would be you. And boy, when I put the word out there, I got some amazing questions on what Ask Me Anything means. And I was not sure what to expect. Surprisingly, no one asked me anything that I was on the fence about answering. But I have to say, there's always tomorrow, right? So thank you for being careful with boundaries, not crossing too many lines. But quite honestly, I'm an open book. So maybe on the next 100, right? Before we get to asking me anything, I want to remind you that I decided to also do a giveaway. That means that you shared your questions, and if I answered them on this episode, then I would be giving something to somebody out there who took the time to ask me the question. So I'm going to get to that later in the episode after we get through the questions, and you'll find out who it is and what it is that will be part of the giveaway. So hang on for a few minutes. Let's get to it. I've briefly looked over these questions, by the way. I have looked at them a little bit, but I did not want to really think about it until it was in the moment, really organic, where I had a chance to answer these questions. Because anything is possible, right? So, got my reading glasses on, got a couple pages here, and we're just going to go for it. All right? The first question, and thank you to everybody that submitted questions, by the way. If I didn't get your question in time or it's not here in this list, you can always reach out to me on the podcast page, to HIListicallySpeaking@gmail.com, on social media. If you have questions, I am always open to answering them. This is just a few that came in that wanted to know some things about me, the podcast, the show, and I'm very happy to answer them. So the first one comes from Mary. She's from Dallas, Texas. And her question is, in 100 episodes, what has been an unexpected yet pleasant surprise from hosting Hilistically Speaking? An unexpected surprise, I would have to say, and I'm looking at the question. I don't have any answers written here. It's just the questions. That we're at 100. We're here at 100 episodes. I never even projected that when I first put this together. It was not about that. It was just about whose stories can I share, the next one. I never was looking too far ahead. So I would say the pleasant surprise is that I'm still here. The audience has grown, being recognized as one of the 15 interview podcasts to tune into was really a lovely surprise. Being able to speak at podcasting conventions and conferences and just being appreciated and recognized for this work. And that to me is something I'm just thinking about off the top of my head right now, of all the things that have manifested since we started this show. So all of it's unexpected because nothing really is planned except for the date when people are recording with me and maybe the topic, somewhat of the topic, but mostly everything's organic. So every day is a pleasant surprise on Hilistically Speaking. I love that question, Mary. Thank you so much. And you did have a second question. Your second question was, what do you look for, or what do you look forward to, rather, in the next 100 episodes? Let's see. I'm really excited. One thing we're doing on Hilistically Speaking is we are going all out video. So while we're already on all podcast platforms, and we have been on YouTube releasing clips and full episodes in audio format, we have just started doing full episodes starting at episode 97 or 98. A couple of my solo episodes have been full, but they were shorter. But now we're going full out. So I'm really excited about that so that it can reach more people. You have an opportunity to see my recording space if that's of interest. But it's connecting us more. And I know that from being in broadcast media and being on TV for close to 30 years now, that there is a connection with video. So for a long time, I thought we were just going to stay on an audio format, but not so much. So I'm looking forward to that with the next 100. And by the way, thank you for being so positive by saying the next 100 episodes. And I hope you'll tune in to those 100 and more. Thank you, Mary. I appreciate your question. Okie doke. The next question comes from Leah from Southern California, and she asked, which 3 guests do you feel you learned the most from? Like, who blew your mind, she put. Who blew your mind, and what is something you never thought about? Or about something you never thought about, rather. Okay. I did write a couple of these down, so I'll be transparent about that, because there are so many episodes that mean something to me. And something I wanted to do with this episode for you is, if I'm ever mentioning an actual episode that's been on HIListically Speaking, I wanted to tell you what the episode number is. So if you want to get a pen and paper and write it down, that's cool. That'll give you an idea to go back and kind of check things. And I'm kind of giving you the cliff notes, I guess you would say. So the episodes that I wrote down, and the people, the guests that I've had that I learned something from, that I never thought about, or maybe something I never knew, one of which was Dr. Janet Rourke. She was episode 47. She is known as the essential oils vet, and many of you know, who've been listening for as long as you have, know that I am a big fan of essential oils and plant-based medicine, being holistic as I am. And Dr. Janet Rourke is the essential oil vet. I don't mean she's just an essential oil vet. She is the essential oil vet. And I learned so much from her, because one of the things I learned is that cats metabolize different from dogs and other animals. And that was really important, because I'm a cat owner. Many of you have seen Eliza. She's made some appearances on the show. And I do diffuse a lot. I do use oils in my home regularly. I use them with my clients. I gift them a lot. So I wanted to be very aware of what I was using in my home. But also, there are more than 50% of people around the world are pet owners. And more of us are starting to look at alternative medicine approaches. So I thought this was a really important episode 47. So if you are a pet owner or know somebody who is, if I am going to try to stay off medication, I'm going to do my darndest to do the same for Miss Eliza. And I've seen her health really go on the up in some ways because of the use of essential oils, even just to calm her down. Like, I'll tell you, there's one oil I use a lot called Balance, which is great for calming animals. So I stick to that one. That was one big takeaway, was Balance that I use. So, all right, another one would be Scarlett Lewis. She was episode 52. I've actually had Scarlett's episode air twice. And Scarlett, if you remember, she was a Sandy Hook mom, or is. She lost her son Jesse at 6 years old during the Sandy Hook shooting, which this December will mark 10 years. And Scarlett I met because she started the Choose Love movement, which is sharing, nurturing, healing love, which were basically Jesse's last words that he put on a chalkboard in the house. And the Choose Love movement I came to know because she was a guest during the Havening Techniques conference a couple years ago. And when I heard her speak, and just what she shared, and how someone a single mom, the only single mom, by the way, who lost their child during something so tragic like Sandy Hook, was able to not turn to anger, but turn to awareness, and how she could turn that around into the healing, nurturing love that really resonates what Jesse's all about, and creating this Choose Love movement, which is quite amazing. I just knew I had to have her on the show, and I learned so much just about compassion and love and kindness, and more so than I already had, but just being able to be somebody that can see that side of things and not go dark really resonated with me. So definitely Scarlett Lewis, episode 52 would be the other one. The third one is a two-parter, and it didn't drop too long ago, and that was with Jonathan Lee Iverson, episode 82 and 83. Jonathan was the ringmaster, the first Black ringmaster, first New Yorker ringmaster, I believe, for the Ringling Brothers for years. This is a man that was operatically trained. He was in pursuit to go that route with his career, and one audition changed his life to where he was wearing that big top hat for many, many years. But that's really not what Jonathan was on the show for. As you might know, I really have a deep love for holding space for stories of disability. My father was disabled, and when Jonathan came on the show, it was because he is now the ringmaster of the Omnium Circus, the circus for the I'm Possible. And this is a circus that holds space for all of their acts, all of their performers have some kind of a disability. And I got a chance to see them in action during the Omnium Circus in May of 2022, and it was phenomenal. But what I learned from Jonathan, which were words that came from P.T. Barnum, was that we all have a peculiar genius. I really have a problem saying that word, peculiar. And we have our own peculiar genius, meaning that we each have something deep in us that means something, that resonates in our heart and soul. And when Jonathan shared both those episodes, we broke it up because it was such a great conversation that it wound up being like 2 hours long. It just really hit me hard that people can do hard things, right? And it's a reminder to what my father used to say, which is disability doesn't mean inability, right? And we'll get more into that because I think I have some other questions that kind of covered that a little bit. But Jonathan Lee Iverson, episode 82 and 83, definitely. And again, Scarlett Lewis, Dr. Janet Rourke, those three guests touched, moved, and inspired me in some beautiful way. But I will say this. Yes, I picked three because you asked, but I say this all the time. Every guest on this show, whether they are an expert in something or just sharing their story of trauma to triumph, every guest is a masterclass to me. And I know you've heard me say that before, and I've said that in many circles on many podcasts that I've been on, that I learned something from everybody. So while these are three guests I have mentioned, I have to say every guest I've had has shared something that's been a takeaway for me that has really touched, moved, and inspired me. So just want to add that on. Okay. Liz is my next question asker. And she asks, she's from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, how do you find your guests? Are you interested in a certain topic and then find your guest? Or is it the other way around? This is good. Now, I did take some time on this one because, again, we're talking about guests, so I want to let you know who the guests are. And this actually is a question that comes in three parts. The first is, how do you find your guests, right? And is it about the topic or do they find you? It's all of the above, Liz. It's all of the above. Basically, it can really be cross-collaboration is one way you can do this. And this is something I started to do later. But cross-collaboration as a podcaster means that I might be on someone else's podcast and they'll come on my podcast. If you align on something, you meet in the middle and you share your thing, your story. And I've been really fortunate to have some beautiful guests on my show who are fellow podcasters. We are a community of people, and it's a really beautiful community, by the way. And if you're thinking of starting a podcast, I highly recommend it. I really do, because it's not only a way to amplify your voice, amplify the voices of others if you are a conversation or interview podcast like I am, but it's also just a chance to connect with a really beautiful group of people. It's a community like I've never experienced before. And I've been in broadcasting, like I said, for almost 30 years. So the cross collaboration is a wonderful way to find guests. And then you can go on places like LinkedIn, and the podcast groups is another thing as well. I've had also PR reps and guests themselves reach out to me, which is something I do once in a while. If I want to be on a show, I'll pitch myself to a show, or I have my team, say I want to be on that show, and I have them pitch me to them. But when publicists reach out to me, and I get a lot of those letters, and some of them are boilerplate, and you can tell when they're boilerplate, but I read every single one of them. I do. And you can tell if they've really researched and they know what your show's about. And I check and I click on the links and I look and I watch and I listen. And if I feel that I'm aligned with this guest that this publicist reached out and told me about, or if the guest reached out and told, the person who wants to be a guest reached out and told me, I will consider it. And I've had a number of them. And some of those that come to mind are David Gendelman, who is the creator of the meditation school. And he's a phenomenal meditation expert. And I didn't know David before. And he had quite a following. And I wasn't aware of that at the time. So I was really very touched that they came to me to want to be on the show. And I had a lovely conversation with David. David was episode 22. And I believe his episode was called The Business of Being Zen. And then Annette Bosworth, Dr. Boz. She's all over the place. I'm sure you've heard of Dr. Boz and the keto continuum. She's a keto doctor. She raves about how keto changed her life, her mother's life, so many people. And each one of these folks, even though they have been guests on the show and they have an expertise, let me tell you, every guest I've had, whether they are a doctor or some kind of practitioner in holistic health, each one of these people have a story that has brought them to what they're doing now. That's the most incredible thing. They aren't just pitching what they know and their knowledge as doctors. They really are sharing a story that brought them to that. Dr. Boz was episode 71, a really beautiful episode, and I highly recommend it. So those were the three that came from publicists reaching out to me. The other side of it was, how do I get my guests? Believe it or not, since I joined TikTok, I have found a couple of guests on TikTok. But in one of those, by the way, before I go further, was John Furniss. You might remember him. That was the blind woodsman. I was watching his videos. I was amazed by the fact that this man who is completely blind was creating the most unbelievable woodwork that I've ever seen. I mean, I can't even whittle, a stick. And this guy is creating the most gorgeous woodwork. And he's completely blind. And I was watching his TikTok and I just reached out to him. I reached out to him and his wife, Annie, and he graciously accepted. Episode 75, that was John Furniss. And I have some other TikTokers that I have reached out to that are going to be on future episodes. I've recorded a couple already, but it's a great place to find people because everyone has a story, my friend. Everyone has a story. And then, of course, there are those people that have been on the bucket list, right? And I talk about a couple of them numerous times because I'm always asked, how did you get them? How did you get them? You know what? It goes back to that. You just have to ask. And that main person there were two people on my bucket list from day one. And one of them was Dan Buettner, the founder of the Blue Zones, best-selling author on the New York Times best-selling author list, and a National Geographic journalist, a fellow, I think he's like a 3-time Guinness Book of World Record cyclist, long-distance cyclist, but people know this guy as the creator of the Blue Zones. And I'm a huge fan of the Blue Zones, those 5 areas around the world where people are living well into their 100s. It's basically the story of longevity. But Dan is probably was one of the top 3 bucket list guests that I wanted in the last 2 years. And I waited a year for him, by the way. I waited a year. I reached out to his people. I was in conversation with his assistant, and I waited patiently. And that's another thing. Sometimes when you just wait, it'll come to you in the right time. And it did. It did. And I had a great conversation with him on episode 66. Another one would be, I was always a fan of Leon Logan-Thetis, and he was actually the first person I ever thought of having on this podcast. Leon, if you remember, if you saw the show on TV, he's known as the Kindness Guy, and he created the show, The Kindness Diaries, which was originally on Netflix, and I think the second season wound up being on Amazon or vice versa. But The Kindness Diaries was all about his travels from point A to point B, or point A to point Z, rather. It could be the Canada down to Argentina, or across Europe, or across the United States. And he did it on nothing but kindness, right? And his little yellow bug. And I was so amazed by that show. I remember being in the car with my mom, and we were in her bug. She had a little red convertible bug, or does. And I was talking to her about creating this podcast. And I said, Mom, I'm going to get Leon on my show. I'm going to get Leon on my show. And I shared that in the episode with Leon too. And I remember my mom said, of course you will. Yeah, of course you will. And I did. And Leon was episode 20 in the first year. And that was such a great episode. I mean, just the Winnie love, the story about him, the love in his dog, just the whole idea of what he did to create this, leaving the world of finance to just travel on kindness. I mean, come on. It's so great, right? So that was probably one of my bucket lists, or it was my first one. And then I remember Dr. Nicola Pelion. You might remember her from the show Alone. She is a wilderness survivalist, an expert in that area, a biologist, a herbalist, and I have really always liked her. And it was not really because of the show. I had her books. She has all these plant medicine books, and my mom had her book. And I remember looking through the book at my mom's place, and I said, ooh, she'd be a good guest. I wonder if she would be on the show. And, long story short, we had a great conversation on episode 79. And just as someone who's an Outward Bound alumna, and someone who loves being in nature, thrives in nature. I love just being out there in the open, knowing that this woman did this for so many days out in the wilderness with just a camera during that show Alone, and probably does it even when the camera's off on her own, was just such a great episode. Again, that's 79 with Nicola Pelion. She was a delight. She really was. And then the other one I have to say would be Dr. Vincent Pedre, the Happy Gut Doctor, America's Gut Doctor. I learned of Dr. P back when I actually won his book, and that book's called Happy Gut, a really good book, and it just shares a lot about the digestive health, the different issues that we might have, how food is medicine. I mean, a lot of my guests are like that, right? So that was definitely one of the guests that I really wanted on this show, and really made a difference. And it was just by asking, my friend. It was just by asking. And Dr. P's episode was 44. So that was his episode. Those are some great questions. I didn't think this episode would be as long, but I'm taking some time answering, so I hope you're really enjoying. So let's move on to the next question. Miss Courtney from Rochester, New York, asks me, what is the most rewarding part of your job hosting guests on your podcast? My most rewarding part is learning something new, and also really holding space for others. You can be famous, you can be a celebrity, you could be an everyday Joe, but it really goes back to us all having a story. And I think that's really what's rewarding, is hearing somebody, holding space for somebody, listening to somebody, because we all have a story, and we should be able to share it and amplify it, So that definitely was something that resonated with me. That's a good question. What's the most rewarding part? I have to think that there's probably a number of things that are rewarding about what I do. And yeah, but holding space for people is definitely the most important, in my opinion. And knowing that it's like the starfish story, right? The starfish story, that young child was on the beach throwing back the starfish, and the man comes along and says, what are you doing? You know the story. And he said, well, I'm saving the starfish. And he goes, well, you can't save them all. And what does he say? But I saved that one. So it's the idea of that ripple effect, of being able to, create some difference in this ecosystem, and amplify and ripple and ripple and ripple and ripple. And that's really what it's about, right? So yeah, I like that question, Courtney. Thank you. what was the, let's go to the opposite side. She goes, what's the least favorite part of your job? Oh, not even about the podcast. Okay, Courtney, I hear you. What is the least favorite part of your job promoting health, wellness, and self-soothing? I overlooked that question, so you're getting me really raw here. The least favorite part of my job promoting health, wellness, and self-soothing, predominantly havening, I imagine you're referring to, is, look, I mean, in this field, in this line of work, whenever you are serving others in health and healing, you're most likely an empath. And I am definitely an empath. And it took a lot for me to learn not to take everything in. You know, we have to have our own personal boundaries too in this work because it could be overwhelming, right? So being able to balance as the empath, but also not take in the pain and discomfort of others and being really transparent about that with myself so that I can be truly present for them with what they need and not make it about me, right? And it took me some time to understand that because, you know, when you feel that way, when you are empathic, you feel. And at some point you just, you still need to feel, but you need to feel with presence and professionalism, really, so that, again, you can be witness to what they need and mirror back to your clients what they don't see in themselves in the moment. I hope that makes sense. So that's a great question. I remember once a coach of mine, when I was talking about not putting everything out there, well, maybe I shouldn't put all this out there. He said, you had a choice. You can be a service or a disservice. And to not put your voice and your healing and your message out there and your gift, then you're being a disservice to others. And that got me. I don't want to be a disservice to anyone. You know, that's not what I'm here for. So that definitely was something that hit me hard. And I really take that to heart. And I see you have a third question too. The third question was, if there was one thing you could change about your role to include more people of economic classes and lives, what would you do? I'm processing that question, Courtney. Let me read that again. If there was one thing you could change about your role to include more people of all economic classes and lives, what would you do? This goes back to being a disservice or a service. I think the one thing, and this is kind of where we get weird talking about money, right? Money is dirty. Money means we're greedy. But you know what? I do want to make more. I want to make a lot more, a shit ton more. And I'll tell you why. Because the more I make, the more I can do for others. The more I don't have to worry about certain things, and I can use that money to create more programs, maybe even create a nonprofit at some point. And I can do this with what I have now, absolutely. But there's an ease, and we all have bills to pay, and we all have responsibilities, right? But I would say that that would be one thing I would change. And it's happening, you know, putting it out there in the universe, manifesting it, it's happening. But I always want what I want when I want it yesterday, which is what my mom and dad always used to say to me. So, but you have to just let go. And I've talked about this a lot too. I have to let go and just let things happen for me and fall into it, like I always say as well. So things are happening, and I have to say that I'm doing my very best to support as many people as possible of all economic classes, of all cultures, all races, total inclusivity to the best of my abilities. You know, I do host a number of free workshops And I did that all through the pandemic, which was so beautiful to just give that gift of healing and self-soothing so that we could get through that, But I will continue to do that. And you know what, Courtney, this is creating a lot of wheels turning in my head of maybe what I want to do going forward. And it's not just, one-on-one, but creating more of a space where there can be more collaborative healing. So you're getting my wheels turning on what I might want to start doing and take this to heart. So thank you for that. That's a really great question. And I appreciate you being so honest and transparent about it. Okay. Moving on to question 6. This is from Arinia. She is from she's from Dominica and Canada, both places. She goes back and forth, she says. First of all, she congratulates me. Congratulations on your 100th episode. Thank you. Where can I find a short course on video editing that's simple? I want to start putting my own podcast recordings on YouTube. Rock on, a podcaster. Love this. Okay, so here's the deal, Arinia. You can do this yourself, okay? You have 2 options, actually. You can do it yourself or you can hire somebody. But I want to guide you to YouTube because there is an abundance of information that you will find that could be so easy to how to edit your podcast. And I love the fact that you're looking to go video because it took me a while. Like my first year plus was all audio. It's all audio files with a thumbnail on YouTube, right? And then I started releasing clips, like 1-minute clips, because I just didn't have time to do an entire episode myself. And I did have somebody editing my episode, but not clips. So I didn't have time to do more than clips. And those were just 1-minute teasers, that I would drop on social and on YouTube. And then I realized that there is value in YouTube, the visual, right? We want to look, we want to see. I'm doing it now. I mean, we're starting to do all the videos, full episode on YouTube, and it matters, right? So what I want to say to you is there are a number of tutorials, and I've seen them, by the way, and I'm not just saying that they're out there. There are a number of tutorials that are put out by the podcast recording platforms like Squadcast, which is the one I use, or Riverside, or a number of the other ones. They all are, they're like stepping up a bit because they're all doing video on their podcast platforms now. Back in the day, Zencaster was just audio. Now it's audio video. Riverside, even, and especially Squadcast, they're amazing with their HD quality, but they all have their own videos out there so that you can find out how to edit yourself. And that leads me to another point. And maybe you don't know this, but I've been working in this field for so long that I've learned how to edit. I've learned how to put this work together. And really, it's just the episode, maybe of guests, and you don't want to take out too much. That's the thing. Like, treat it like it's live, press record, get comfortable in front of the camera. That's the other thing, making eye contact. But also it has to do with, for a long time, and I've been guilty of this too, is taking out every like so. We call it vocal garbage in the business. But some of that's natural. So leave some of it in. Some of the little stumbles are okay. That's how you talk normally. I will tell that to my college students all the time. This is your normal speaking pattern. Work on enunciation, work on speaking more clearly and slowly. But don't take out every like so now, and A couple are okay. So you're going to spend I just said so. You're going to spend a lot of time editing out that vocal garbage and trying to make it perfect when, just be real, right? And I know this is more than what you asked, but I just want to share that with you because I think it's important, whether it's you that gains some information from this or somebody else that's listening that might have a podcast and is thinking of doing the audio or video quality or bumping it up a bit. Just be real, And in addition to the podcast platforms having their own tutorials, you can also hire somebody. I mean, I've seen stuff all the time on Fiverr where there's people that will edit your podcast. I've seen a number of people on social media or in podcast groups that have offered their services, and it can range anywhere from $50 to $500, right? You just have to find the right person that works for you if you don't want to do it yourself. And for me, I just don't have the time. And I wanted that to be done by somebody else. Yes, I can do it, but my time is valuable and it gives me more space to do other things or get guests or the other work that I have, like my clients or other broadcasting work that I have. So for me, having my team, and they do the clips, they do the editing of the videos, they do everything, and it's really valuable to me. And if you can find the right person to work with you, they'll understand your voice, they'll understand everything, and after a while it just becomes a really beautiful flow. But if it is you wanting to do it yourself, before you take a course, because there's so many courses out there, before you take a course, check out some of the YouTube videos with the podcast platforms that I mentioned. Just give it a shot, because you'll see that it's easy. And if it's a time thing, there's always the possibility. You and I know that I got this question from She Podcast, which is one of the groups we're in. I'm also talking at the She Podcast live in June, so I hope to see you there. There are a number of groups like She Podcast or Podcast Collaborative or Podcasters on Facebook or whatever the groups are, where you can probably pose this question and very likely get an answer back. In fact, I'm sure where you asked this question, other people probably responded. So you can always reach out to me too if you have more questions, or reach out to me in the podcast groups that we're in together on Facebook. So that's a great question. I hope that answered the question for you. If not, I gave you a little more information too, but hopefully that's helpful. And thank you for asking your question. Okay, next question, number 7. Miss Bree from Minneapolis. Now, I know Miss Bree. She has a podcast, Clever Conversations. I have been on that podcast. So yay to fellow podcaster asking a question. What has been your hardest conversation? Oh, Bree, girl. All right, girl. I will tell you. I love this question, though. This is a good one. And I did write down a couple episodes for this as well. My hardest conversations, I'm going to pluralize this because this goes back to what I mentioned before about my dad. My dad's been gone 20 years this November, and my father was disabled, an amputee, and I lived my entire life with a disabled father. So it's very important, that topic. So the hardest conversations sometimes that I have are either about disability or death. But what I've learned is that those are the kind of conversations I need to have for my own healing and my own learning. And with each of those conversations, I've learned so much. I've taken away so much, and I have so much more compassion for myself with the healing that I continue to do. Which, by the way, one of the biggest turning points and shifts for me with dealing with my father's passing was havening. When I was havened by Dr. Ron Rudin on stage during my first workshop, it changed everything for me on how I look at that death and my father's illness and the upset that I had about my father not being well all those years. And I look at it differently because the brain changed, right? That it just completely changed the landscape of things with my brain, and that's how havening works. So that's one thing to take into consideration. But the hardest conversations specifically that I've had where I've really, really felt something deep, one was with Kimberly Warner. She was episode 61. She has maldebarkment. It's a vestibular disorder, which means she shakes rocks and bobbles, like nothing in her world is still. And that just sat with me so deeply because she is such a kind, caring, beautiful person. And she was a filmmaker and photographer and created this company as a filmmaker for those who are also battling some kind of a disability, whether it's silent or seen. And she created Unfixed Media, and it was such a delight talking to her. I highly recommend that episode. She's just, I just thinking about it just hits me hard. And from Kimberly's on episode 61, episode 62 was a really beautiful episode with a friend of mine who is a former client, actually, and that's Gustavo Serafini. And he has the Enabled Disabled podcast he had for quite a while. And I was on Enabled Disabled, and I aired that podcast on this podcast. And basically the whole thing was about disability not being inability. My dad used to say that all the time. Disability doesn't mean inability. And it sticks with me to this day. So in that episode, I shared the story of my dad and I. I shared my story as a child of a disabled parent. And that was episode 62. And if anyone out there listening understands that, that's an episode to really listen to, because you'll get to the heart of who I am if you haven't heard it so far. And then there were two others where we dealt with disability. Now we're covering death. Dana Humphrey, she came to me, I believe. I think she reached out to me, and she was one of those people. I'm like, wow, that's a fascinating topic. She's a death doula. And her whole thing is supporting people on the final leg of their journey and celebrating their life and their legacy and just partying like a rock star on the way out. I mean, I don't even know how else to say it, but that episode 54, Dying the Good Death, was really something that made me think about how I want to plan my own out onto this world, because it sounds pretty awesome to involve glitter in some way. And by the way, we did talk about that. So Dana Humphrey, episode 54, Dying the Good Death, the death doula. And her story was pretty amazing, how she fell into that line of work, which happened during the pandemic. So give it a listen. It's a good one. I actually might go back and listen to that one because it was so good. And then the other one I just recently dropped, and that was episode 98, and that was with Dr. Kathy Zhang, which is about palliative care. And wow, that one was something else. I had wanted to have somebody to come on to talk about palliative care. And this is a doctor who was really in it during the pandemic. And she really expressed some deep, deep stuff. What it was like to be a healthcare worker in the hospitals during that time, especially in the line of work she's in. So episode 98 with Dr. Kathy, who's also the Purpose Filter podcast. I'll give her a shout out because she's doing beautiful work, and I'll actually be on that podcast soon. And those four, so Kimberly, Gustavo, Dana, and Kathy, those 4 episodes about disability and dying were the hardest conversations I've had, but actually the most healing. Yeah, most healing. Thank you, Bree. I appreciate that question. That was a good one. Okay, question number 8 from Steve in New York City, right across the water from me. All right, so Steve asked, what's Hug It Out? Okay, so I talk about this a lot, right? I say, hug it out, set up a call and we'll hug it out. So Hug It Out is my program, and it actually is an acronym. The hug is an acronym. And I'm going to take you back a little before I even share what that is. When you get into a little kerfuffle with someone, or you have an upset with someone, the first thing somebody might say, like a coach or somebody who's like, oh, come on, hug it out, get over it, basically, without being so harsh with the words get over it. But to hug it out means to like let bygones be bygones, like just embrace, care. Everything's okay. You two love each other. Even if you don't agree, you can disagree, right? You can agree to disagree. Yeah, that's great. So why aren't we doing that to ourselves, right? Why aren't we hugging it out with ourselves? We spend a lot of time bullying ourselves. We spend a lot of time in imposter syndrome. We spend a lot of time just really downing our worth. So self-love and self-worth are really important. and they need to be present for you to live a resilient life. And it's one of the things, it's part of my pillars that I share with my clients. So what I mean by hug it out is you need to really love yourself. You need to embrace yourself. You need to be okay not being okay. You need to be accepting of the flaws and the upsets and the little things that happen in your life and just hug it out. And hug stands for 3 things. Healing, because we're all healing. We're all works in progress. Understanding, because you better be understanding of yourself and hold space for yourself. And gratitude, because there's nothing more important than being grateful. Healing, understanding, and gratitude. Hug it out. Great question. I love it. And if anyone wants to learn more about how we can hug it out, I'll put that in the podcast notes because I'd love to hear from you. All right. Sunil from Pittsburgh. All right, Mr. Sunil, your question is, this was a late entry. I think it came in today. Who is your worst guest and who is your dream guest? And then he wrote, besides me. He has not been a guest on the show, but I love the humor. Thank you, Sunil. And he also who is no longer living. I added that actually. So who is my worst guest? I don't know what that even means because every guest I've had on my show has been stellar, has been amazing, has been a learning experience. If they don't align with what I'm doing, then they're not going to be on my show. It doesn't mean they're not a good person. It just means that they are not a good fit for Hilistically Speaking. So there is no worst. There are just people that might not be aligning with my space, right? Although we're all going through healing, we've all been through upsets and trauma. So I guess everybody has a story that could fit. But I have to say, I've never had a guest that I haven't liked. So my dream guest is a very long list that I'm working on and reaching out to some people to come. I'm going to keep that kind of a secret though. But myself and my team are in the process of reaching out to some of my next bucket listers, and you're going to know who they are. And I'm very excited about that. So we'll keep that one a surprise if that's okay. All right. But I added one other because I do talk about this a lot and I talk about him a lot. And I added who is a guest that I would like to have had that is no longer living. And without question, and I wish I could have sat down with him, if only for a moment, Dr. Wayne Dyer. That would be, and I get emotional thinking about it because I always call him my spiritual daddy. And it's funny, every time I talk to my brother about Dr. Wayne, I get the story about how my brother knows Dr. Wayne because my brother lived in Maui. Dr. Wayne Dyer lived in Maui. They spent time together. But I was never in that circle, And, I live vicariously sometimes through my brother David because of the stories he tells about hanging out with Dr. Wayne and his wife and his daughters and just that energy. It's a happy little jealousy, but I wish I could sit down with Dr. Dyer. I really do. So I sit with him every day, actually. I just don't have a microphone in front of him and headphones on, but I'm amplifying with him in other ways and he's amplifying right back. So thank you for that question. Okay, last question. This, it comes from my mom. My mother is a very attentive listener of Hilistically Speaking, and I'm sure now that she knows that it's video on YouTube, she will go to youtube.com/Hilary Russo and find the playlist for this podcast and probably start watching it because, she's a mom, right? But she is a listener, and I do appreciate that, Mom. So Bev from Connecticut, she said, and I love ending on this question, and I put this here on purpose. She said, how many more episodes can we look forward to? Oh, thanks, Mom. Life is abundant. Those are words I learned from you. And there is no end, right? There's no end. I don't have any plans of stopping. I'm just getting revved up. So, Mom, you can look forward to hearing my voice many times more. In fact, I think I made a promise to Mary that I was going to have another 100 episodes, right? So there you go. So on that note, we have a lot to look forward to, don't we, friends? And just like that, Eliza Doolittle makes an appearance. I mean, it wouldn't be a Hilistically Speaking episode without this cat sitting on my lap. And now that we're video, here she is. Hey, baby girl. Those of you listening, I have a beautiful calico that I've named Eliza Doolittle, and she is my heart. And sometimes she'll sit behind me on the chair and be present. But she just made an appearance as we were about to go into the close of this episode, which is this. I'm giving away one-on-one sessions to every person whose question was answered on this podcast. So this is something I really want to do because I believe really wholeheartedly in the work that I do and how it's helping others. And I guess, Courtney, this will go back to it being something to answer your question. And I thought about this, that this is one way that I can help all. I don't know some of the people who've submitted questions here. I don't know your economic class or your race or your gender or what you identify as. And honestly, what's important is that we're human beings and we're sharing the gift that we each have to share. So I want to give all 10 of these people who submitted their questions a free one-on-one session with me. And it's my way of saying thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being present. Thank you for taking over the reins as chief question asker in this episode. And if I didn't answer your question, which I did try to answer them all, I did get a lot that came in a little later. Ask me those questions. I would love to know. You can reach out to me, as you know, through the listen notes that I'll post on social media, on Hilistically Speaking, on TikTok, on social media. All of their social media I'm on is Hilary Russo. So that's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all Hilary Russo, with the exception of TikTok because I waited too long and I didn't get my name. So it's Hilistically Speaking. But you can reach out to me in any way, and also hilisticallyspeaking@gmail.com. if you are interested in learning more about havening and how you can learn to stress less, find your calm, build resiliency, and of course, be kind to your mind. And again, I'll put that link in the show notes. And wherever you are listening or watching this show, thank you so much. And I encourage you to take a look back at all those episodes. I hope you did get a pen and paper at the beginning so that you could write down those episodes. Of course, you can always listen back. They are wonderful episodes. And on that note, it's just great to see how this show has evolved. I'm just sitting here thinking about it, thinking back in my mind to day one when we dropped like 3 episodes. I think we dropped the first 3 back in June of 2020, and seeing how the show has evolved, frankly, seeing how I have evolved. And, you know, it really makes a difference, and it's because of you. So wherever you're listening, wherever you're watching, be sure to subscribe. Leave a rating and review. I read everything. And if you have guest ideas, show ideas, let me know. And I will share it with my team and we will make it happen. So many of the guests I've had on here are my choosing from what we talked about in one of those questions. Either people reach out to me or it's a bucket list of people I want or a topic I want. But if you have a topic you want me to cover, let me know. I will find the person. Or perhaps you know the person. So be a part of the show. This is your show too. You're tuning in, you're taking time out to be on the show. And for that, I am so grateful. And on that note, in more gratitude, Hilistically Speaking is edited by my amazing team at 2 Market Media, with music by the talented and loving and caring my dear friend Lipone Redding, and of course recorded on Squadcast, where you can find videos on how to edit your reels together yourself, your episode together yourself. And of course, this would not be possible without you, my listeners, my watchers, my Thrive Hive. So on that note, thanks for tuning in, making the past 2 years and 100 episodes incredibly meaningful. Keep asking the questions. I am listening. And of course, be kind to your mind. And don't forget to laugh. And I'll leave you with this. I look forward to laughing with you, holding space for you, and just being present with you on episode 101 and beyond. And on that note, be well.
I know the girl